Welcome to my channel. Welcome to my channel SensexKaFunda, the only free channel that does not offer any stock tips, does not have any paid courses or masterclass, or has no promotional agenda. This channel is for the average investor, not for speculators or traders. Friends, you are all aware that steep US tariffs are expected to hit India from 27th August, that is tomorrow. Tomorrow is Ganesh Chaturthi. It's an auspicious day for India, and I am sure Lord Ganesh will bless India with all his blessings to be able to withstand any damage that these tariffs will cause. Russian Indian exporters are bracing for a sharp decline in US orders after trade talks collapsed and Washington confirmed steep new tariffs on South Asian nations' goods will take effect from Wednesday. An additional 25% duty announced by President Trump, confirmed in a notice by the US Department of Homeland Security, takes total tariffs to as much as 50%, among the Washington highest, in retaliation for New Delhi's increased buying of Russian oil. Now, it is pertinent now here to stop and explore who has really benefited from this cheap Russian oil. Has India as a whole benefited, or has select business families benefited, as the US Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent says? Secretary accused India of profiteering, those sharp words, from its increased purchases of Russian oil during the war in Ukraine. Bessent told CNBC in an interview that Russian oil now accounted for 42% of India's total oil purchases, up from under 1% before the war, and contrasted that with long-term buyer China, whose Russian oil purchases had increased to 16%. So basically what he's saying is that India, which accounted for only 1% of Russian oil before the war, is now buying 42% of Russian oil. India is just profiteering. They are reselling what I would call Indian arbitrage, buying cheap Russian oil, reselling it as product, has just sprung up during the war, which is unacceptable. Let's analyze Secretary Bessent's statements with data. He's right in saying that India has significantly increased its purchase of Russian crude oil. India now imports close to 35 to 40% of Russian oil in total crude imports. In India, before 2022, Russian oil made up for less than 1% of India's imports. Post sanctions, India has ramped up purchases due to steep discounts. But who has really benefited from this cheap Russian oil? Is it referred to India's richest family? Now, Adani does not operate in the oil space. It is Mukesh Ambani who operates in the oil space. And yes, as an astute businessman, he has rightly imported Russian oil at cheap prices and re-exported them to Europe after refining. You cannot blame Mukesh Ambani for profiting from this trade because he's a businessman. This man reportedly made $724 million from Russian oil. To January 2025, that is close to a period of 1.5 years, Reliance earned more than 724 million euros or $787 million on exports of fuel to the US made from Russian oil. Before 2022, Russian oil accounted for less than 1%, and after the invasion after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, India accounts for now 35 to 40% of Russian oil imports. Now, friends, it's worth analyzing if Reliance and Mukesh Ambani, as an astute businessman, did make profit by importing cheap Russian oil, refining it, and selling it to Europe predominantly and US. Why could not India's other oil refiners do the same? In fact, HPCL, BPCL, and IOC was also importing Russian oil. Did India's consumers see any decline in oil prices at the petrol pump? No, Indian consumers are still paying the old high price, even though India imported record amounts of Russian oil. The Russian crude windfall should be more than a profit cushion for oil marketing companies like HPCL, BPCL and IOC, and a fiscal lifeline for government. With oil marketing companies reporting profits in excess of 86,000 crore rupees, central excise revenues touching 2.7 lakh crore and state VAT adding another 2 lakh crore, it is clear that consumers have been excluded from the very benefits that were promised. While Reliance and Mukesh Ambani gained, it is time now that Indian consumers demand that oil marketing companies also contribute their margins to cheaper oil prices. Cheap oil must no longer remain locked away in corporate profits and public treasuries. It must translate into lower pump prices and genuine relief for India's consumers who have long borne the brunt of high fuel costs despite an era of discounted crude. It is now for India to release the benefits of cheap Russian oil that has been benefiting India's public sector undertakings to also benefit consumers. Thank you.